The immaterium is a realm of boundless chaos, a shifting sea of emotion and thought that defies the laws of the physical universe. For humanity, this domain has always been both a source of immense power and an existential threat. Within its depths lies the Webway, an ancient and labyrinthine network of tunnels constructed by the enigmatic Eldar long before humanity's first steps into the stars. This hidden realm is a fragile barrier, separating the material universe from the raw, unfiltered madness of the warp. The Webway is no mere transit system. It is a lifeline to countless civilizations, a shield against the predatory horrors of the immaterium. Yet its existence is far from secure. Millennia of neglect, war, and sabotage have left the Webway cracked and vulnerable. To some, it represents salvation. To others, it is a prize to be claimed or destroyed. As the Imperium of Man stands on the brink of annihilation, the Webway has become the stage for a battle unlike any other. The forces of chaos seek to exploit its weaknesses, tearing the veil between realities to unleash destruction upon the galaxy. Meanwhile, the Emperor of Mankind, once a beacon of hope, has been locked in a desperate struggle to safeguard the Webway from within, even as his mortal body decays upon the Golden Throne. The war in the Webway is not just a struggle for survival, but a clash of ideologies, ambitions, and cosmic forces. It is a confrontation where ancient technologies meet unspeakable horrors, where the fate of humanity teeters on the edge of a blade. Here, alliances falter, secrets emerge, and heroes are forged in the fires of desperation. In this labyrinth of shadows where reality bends and hope flickers, the stakes could not be higher. This is not merely a battle for territory. It is a final gambit for the future of humanity, a conflict that will determine whether the galaxy succumbs to eternal darkness or clings to a fleeting spark of light. The war in the Webway drew a diverse and formidable array of factions, each driven by their own goals, grudges, and destinies. At the heart of the conflict stood the Imperium of Man, with its unmatched determination to preserve humanity against the horrors lurking in the immaterium. The Emperor himself, wielding his unparalleled psychic might, was the central figure in this struggle. His vision of safeguarding the Webway was not only a tactical necessity, but the culmination of millennia of planning. To protect the fragile integrity of this hidden domain, the Emperor relied on an elite force known as the Custodian Guard. These warriors, clad in auramite and armed with unmatched weaponry, were the pinnacle of human genetic and martial refinement. Alongside them were the Sisters of Silence, a sisterhood of null maidens whose very presence nullified psychic phenomena. They were indispensable allies in a war waged within a realm so steeped in psychic energy that it could drive lesser beings mad. Yet, even these stalwart guardians would not be enough. The tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus played a crucial role, fortifying vulnerable junctions of the Webway and deploying ancient technologies capable of stabilizing collapsing corridors. Though not warriors in the traditional sense, their arcane mastery of machinery made them an essential component of the defense effort. However, even the combined strength of these forces struggled against the ever-present threat of chaos. From the roiling depths of the warp emerged the legions of demons, manifestations of pure malevolent will. These entities were not mere soldiers. They were living expressions of madness and corruption, summoned forth by powerful sorcerers who sought to unravel reality itself. At the head of these infernal hosts stood the arch-traitor Magnus the Red, whose betrayal had caused an irreparable wound in the Webway's structure. His mastery of the arcane made him the architect of devastation, a figure whose ambitions aligned all too closely with the will of the Chaos Gods. The demonic forces were far from homogeneous. The bloodletters of Khorne surged forward with berserk fury, seeking slaughter for its own sake. The horrors of Tzeentch twisted the Webway's pathways, turning reality into a surreal nightmare of shifting colors and illusions. Nurgle's plague-ridden foot soldiers sought to corrupt and erode the Webway's foundations, spreading disease in both physical and metaphysical forms. Meanwhile, Slaneshi hosts sought to unbind the psychic resonance of the Webway through sensory overload and discord, turning awe-inspiring vistas into landscapes of grotesque excess. Each demonic cohort was both a weapon and a strategy, woven into a tapestry of destruction aimed at undermining the Emperor's great work. The Eldar, whose ancestors had constructed the Webway, were not bystanders in this cataclysmic struggle. Though fragmented and bitter over their dwindling power, certain Eldar factions recognized the catastrophic implications of chaos gaining control over the Webway. Craftworld forces led by their Farseers and Warlocks entered the fray with a grim understanding of the stakes involved. Their psychically attuned warriors were adept at navigating the Webway's labyrinthine corridors, wielding psychic powers that could reshape the course of a battle in an instant. Though they distrusted humanity, they were compelled to act, not out of altruism, but because the destruction of the Webway would herald their final extinction. Additionally, dark whispers spread that remnants of other, more secretive factions moved through the shadows of the Webway. These elusive combatants had no allegiance to the Imperium, Chaos, or even the Eldar. Their motivations were steeped in secrecy, their actions unpredictable. While their presence was barely acknowledged by those embroiled in the war, their subtle interventions often shifted the tide of battle in unexpected ways. As the war intensified, it became clear that this was not merely a conflict between warriors, but a battle of wills between ancient powers. The Webway, in all its intricate complexity, became a crucible that drew countless beings into its depths, each vying to reshape the galaxy's future. Despite their conflicting motives, every participant in this war shared a grim understanding. The Webway was more than a battlefield. It was the final safeguard of creation itself. The path to the war in the Webway was forged long before the first clash of blades or the opening of warp portals. It began with the Emperor's grand vision of uniting humanity under a single indomitable banner, a vision that required not only mastery over the material galaxy, but also the means to shield mankind from the dangers lurking within the immaterium. The Emperor knew that as long as warp travel remained the primary method of interstellar movement, humanity would remain vulnerable to the chaotic forces that dwelled beyond reality's edge. His solution was as audacious as it was brilliant: the creation of a vast and secure Webway network accessible only to mankind, bypassing the need for warp travel entirely. However, this vision was not born in a vacuum. The Webway itself was an ancient construct, a product of the Eldar Empire's mastery over the immaterial. By tapping into its pathways, the Emperor sought to adapt its design and create a protected realm that would allow for instantaneous and safe travel across the stars. Yet, the Eldar's downfall had left much of the Webway fractured and dangerous, and reclaiming even a portion of its vast expanse was an undertaking fraught with peril. Nevertheless, the Emperor pressed forward, establishing secret projects deep within the labyrinth of Terra to breach and stabilize a section of the Webway for human use. The decision to pursue this project was driven by more than ambition. It was an existential necessity. Humanity's expansion across the galaxy had drawn the gaze of ancient malevolent entities, and the warp's influence was growing stronger with each passing year. The Emperor's long war against the warp-spawned horrors was escalating, and he understood that without a means of bypassing the warp altogether, the Imperium would eventually crumble beneath the weight of its enemies. The Webway project was not simply an innovation, it was a lifeline. Yet, this bold endeavor was not without its risks. The warp was a realm of infinite unpredictability, and even the smallest disruption could cascade into disaster. The creation of a stable, human-accessible Webway demanded precision on a cosmic scale. It required psychic containment barriers, an unbreakable tether between Terra and the network, and constant vigilance against intrusions. Any mistake could tear open breaches into the immaterium itself. Despite these dangers, the Emperor's will was absolute. His vision of a united, invulnerable humanity could not be delayed by fear. However, the delicate nature of the project made it vulnerable. The Webway was not merely a passage, it was a living dimension, intertwined with the fabric of the warp itself. Even the act of breaching its gates for a noble cause risked attracting the attention of the entities that prowled beyond the veil. And so it was that, in a moment of betrayal, the unthinkable happened. The barrier between the Webway and the warp was compromised, opening a floodgate to the horrors of chaos. This betrayal did not happen in isolation. It was the culmination of subtle manipulations, bitter grievances, and a deeper scheme orchestrated by the forces of chaos. The breach in the Webway was not a mere accident or act of sabotage. It was the result of a calculated effort to strike at the very heart of the Emperor's grand plan. The warp, ever eager to exploit weakness, surged forth with terrifying force, threatening to consume the newly constructed Imperial Webway. The failure to contain the breach meant that the Imperium's greatest hope had now become its greatest vulnerability. The sanctity of Terra itself was at stake, for if the Webway collapsed entirely or was fully overrun, the Immaterium's predatory energies could spill into the core of humanity's heartland. The Emperor, who had strived to shield humanity from the warp, was now forced to act as its final line of defense within the Webway's crumbling corridors. This pivotal moment of betrayal and catastrophe did not occur in isolation. It rippled through the Imperium, sowing panic and desperation. The efforts to stabilize the Webway turned into a frantic war to hold back the demonic tide. The dream of a safe galactic highway had become a brutal battleground. The very network intended to secure humanity's future was now the arena for a battle that could erase that future entirely. The seeds of this conflict had been planted long before, but it was the decision to tamper with an ancient, precarious creation that ultimately invited catastrophe. The Webway, which had once symbolized untold potential, now served as a grim reminder of what happens when ambition meets the unpredictable chaos of the Immaterium. The conflict within the Webway erupted with a ferocity that few could have anticipated. What began as an effort to reclaim and secure vital pathways soon devolved into a brutal, unending war for survival. The first stage of the war was marked by chaos, as demonic incursions surged through the breach, overwhelming the initial defenses and spreading across the labyrinthine corridors. The Emperor's forces, caught off guard by the scale of the assault, scrambled to contain the rapidly expanding rift. In the earliest days of the invasion, the Webway became a nightmare of shifting landscapes and psychic storms. Entire battalions were swallowed by sudden warp anomalies, their final moments marked by echoes of distant screams. Desperate to prevent the corruption from reaching further into Terra's stabilizing nexus, the Custodian Guard spearheaded counteroffensives to reclaim key junctions. Battles raged through shimmering corridors of impossible geometry, where time and space bent under the strain of psychic energies. The Custodians and Sisters of Silence fought as one, their unity forming an anchor against the tides of unreality. The second phase of the war saw a shift in tactics. After the initial wave of chaos, the Imperial defenders began reinforcing critical choke points to slow the demonic advance. Entire sections of the Webway were sealed off, collapsing pathways and creating fortified redoubts to funnel the invaders into kill zones. The tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus worked tirelessly to stabilize crumbling sections, utilizing forbidden technologies to erect barriers that pulsed with warding runes. However, such measures came at a cost. Each defensive maneuver sacrificed precious ground, forcing the Imperium to cede sections of the Webway that could never be reclaimed. The war's third stage brought devastation on an unprecedented scale. The forces of chaos, led by sorcerers who twisted the very fabric of reality, unleashed new horrors upon the battlefield. The Webway itself became a weapon against the defenders, pathways split apart or fused into mazes of looping tunnels that led to nowhere. The Emperor personally intervened at pivotal moments, using his immense psychic power to stabilize entire regions. His presence was a beacon of hope, but it came with dire consequences. Every second he spent within the Webway drained his essence, leaving his mortal form more fragile with each passing moment. Despite these interventions, the demonic hordes pressed their advantage. Corrupted constructs of the Webway began to emerge, writhing masses of sentient energy that consumed everything in their path. The defenders found themselves fighting not only against physical enemies, but against the very fabric of the Webway, which bent and twisted in response to the encroaching madness. As the war dragged on, the conflict escalated into a series of cataclysmic battles. One of the most pivotal confrontations took place at a junction known as the Shattered Gate, a critical access point that controlled dozens of pathways. Here, the Emperor's forces made their stand against a massive host of warp-born monstrosities. The battle raged for days, each side pouring everything they had into the struggle. The custodians led relentless charges, carving through the enemy ranks with unmatched precision, while the Sisters of Silence nullified the sorcerous energies fueling the demonic onslaught. By the battle's end, the Shattered Gate was left a scorched ruin, but the Imperial defenders had held their ground, though at a devastating cost. The penultimate phase of the war saw the Webway descend into utter chaos. The demons, emboldened by the destruction wrought in earlier battles, launched coordinated assaults on multiple fronts. Entire legions of Imperial forces were cut off and annihilated as the defenders struggled to regroup. Communications broke down, and isolated units were forced to fight brutal, last-stand engagements in the darkened labyrinths. Some sections of the Webway fell completely silent, their fates unknown. Still, the defenders persevered, driven by the knowledge that failure would mean the fall of Terra itself. In the final weeks of the war, desperation reached its peak. Reinforcements from the surface of Terra poured into the Webway, but the toll was staggering. For every corridor reclaimed, another was lost to the void. The Emperor's direct interventions became increasingly rare as he concentrated all his remaining strength on reinforcing the central nexus that anchored the Imperial Webway. His psychic might radiated through the tunnels, forming shields of golden light that halted entire waves of demonic entities. Yet even this was not enough to stem the tide indefinitely. The war within the Webway was not defined by singular victories or defeats, but by the sheer scale of attrition and endurance. The labyrinth became a graveyard for countless souls, a theater of war where survival itself was a triumph. As the forces of chaos pushed deeper, the defenders grew more resolute, their final stand drawing near. Every passageway, every sealed portal, and every fortified node became a battlefield soaked in blood and sorrow. As the war reached its crescendo, both sides understood that the outcome would shape the destiny of the galaxy. The battle lines had been drawn, and the final confrontation loomed on the horizon, a clash that would either solidify humanity's last hope or plunge the Imperium into unending darkness. The final turning point of the war in the Webway came during the climactic battle for the Nexus Gate, the critical anchor point upon which the entire Imperial Webway depended. This convergence of labyrinthine passages was more than a strategic junction. It was the keystone that kept the Emperor's grand design from unraveling entirely. If the Nexus Gate fell, the Webway project would collapse, and the Immaterium would pour through the breach, engulfing Terra in a storm of warp-born chaos. The battle for this gate was not merely another engagement, but the decisive moment upon which the future of humanity hinged. As the forces of chaos amassed for their final push, the defenders of the Nexus Gate prepared for what they knew could be their last stand. The Emperor, despite his waning strength, took direct control of the defense. His presence radiated through the corridors like a beacon of light cutting through the abyss, strengthening the resolve of those who fought beneath his banner. While his custodian guard and the Sisters of Silence formed the backbone of the defense, contingents of Imperial soldiers and Mechanicus constructs reinforced the lines, wielding experimental weaponry designed specifically to combat warp incursions. The assault began with an overwhelming surge of demonic entities led by sorcerous champions steeped in the darkest powers of the Immaterium. Warp storms churned through the corridors, twisting reality into a nightmarish blur of impossible colors and sensations. Entire battalions were annihilated in moments, reduced to ash or consumed by void-like rifts. Despite this, the Imperial forces held their positions, sacrificing countless lives to buy precious moments for the Emperor to enact his final strategy. The key turning point came when the Emperor unleashed a psychic ward of unprecedented scale, a manifestation of pure willpower that created a temporary null field across the Nexus Gate. This barrier severed the connection between the warp and the physical realm, cutting off the demonic forces from their lifeline of corruptive energy. For a brief moment, the tides of chaos faltered. The horrors that had seemed invincible began to weaken, their forms flickering as their connection to the Immaterium was disrupted. Sensing the importance of this opportunity, the Emperor ordered an immediate counteroffensive. The custodians led a devastating charge, striking with the precision and lethality of a surgical blade. The Sisters of Silence advanced alongside them, their null auras further destabilizing the sorcerous constructs that had once dominated the battlefield. The Mechanicus unleashed a final array of arcane devices that shattered unstable portions of the Webway, collapsing corrupted corridors and trapping large portions of the demonic host in dead-end pathways. However, this triumph came at an unimaginable cost. The strain of maintaining the null field tore through the Emperor's psychic essence, draining his strength at an alarming rate. His mortal body, already sustained by the sheer force of his will, began to wither. Yet he did not relent. With the Nexus Gate stabilized and the main demonic incursion severed, the remaining forces of chaos were thrown into disarray. Lacking the support of their warp energies, many were banished back into the Immaterium, their corporeal forms unraveling into vaporous echoes of their former fury. The final moments of the battle were marked by the collapse of key portions of the surrounding Webway to ensure no resurgence could threaten the gate. The Emperor's forces, though battered and depleted, held long enough for the Nexus to be fully sealed from further intrusion. The surviving demons were hunted down corridor by corridor until the last remnant of chaos was purged from the immediate vicinity. With the breach sealed and the Webway partially stabilized, the Imperium emerged victorious, but only by the narrowest of margins. This victory, however, was bittersweet. The Emperor, having expended nearly all his strength, was irrevocably weakened. Though his consciousness endured, his physical form was rendered incapable of continuing his work within the Webway. The Nexus Gate remained intact, but the Emperor's dream of a fully realized human-controlled Webway was left unfinished. In the end, the decision to expend his own strength to sever the warp's hold over the Nexus Gate was both the defining moment of the war and the cause of its grim aftermath. The Imperium had defended its heart and denied chaos its ultimate prize, but the cost was staggering. The Webway project, once seen as a beacon of hope, had become a scarred monument to sacrifice and loss. The forces of chaos had been driven back, yet their defeat carried the promise of their inevitable return. This final battle was not won through sheer force alone, but through the Emperor's unparalleled resolve and the loyalty of those who fought at his side. The Nexus Gate stood as a testament to their perseverance, a fragile bulwark against the storm. But the fate of the Imperium, now more than ever, depended on the fragile balance between survival and sacrifice. The aftermath of the war in the Webway sent shockwaves across the galaxy, reshaping the Imperium and redefining humanity's struggle for survival. The immediate consequence was the irrevocable shift in the balance of power on Terra. The Emperor, once an active and commanding presence, was now bound to the Golden Throne in a state that blurred the line between life and death. His physical body, sustained only by the mechanisms of the throne, became a symbol of tragic sacrifice, a reminder that even the most powerful being in human history could be brought low by the demands of war. The implications of this transformation were profound. With the Emperor unable to personally guide his Imperium, the burden of leadership fell upon his subordinates and institutions. the Adeptus Terra rose in prominence, assuming responsibility for the governance and protection of humanity in his stead. However, without the Emperor's direct oversight, internal divisions within the Imperium deepened. The ecclesiarchy expanded its influence, elevating the Emperor from a revered leader to a figure of divine worship, altering the cultural and spiritual fabric of humanity. What had once been a vision of unity through enlightenment and reason became a religion rooted in veneration and dogma. The failure to fully stabilize the Webway project also meant that the Imperium's reliance on warp travel remained an unavoidable vulnerability. The dream of safe, instantaneous travel across the stars was shattered, replaced by the grim reality of continued dependence on unstable warp routes plagued by unpredictable storms and malevolent entities. This limitation shaped the Imperium's future conflicts, as the flow of reinforcements, resources, and information remained subject to the whims of the Immaterium. The loss of the Webway as a viable transportation network ensured that humanity's expansion would be cautious and constrained, while the threat of chaos incursions loomed over every expedition. Beyond Terra, the ripples of the war spread throughout the galaxy. The Eldar, for whom the Webway was both a legacy and a lifeline, were deeply affected by the Imperium's intrusion and the subsequent devastation. Though many Eldar factions had been too fragmented or wary to intervene directly, the destruction within the Webway reignited debates among their leaders. Some saw humanity's actions as a reckless affront to the ancient balance, while others viewed the Imperium's failure as proof that no mortal species could ever hope to control the Webway. This internal strife among the Eldar further fragmented their already fragile civilization, pushing some factions closer to open hostility with the Imperium while driving others into isolation. The forces of chaos, though temporarily repelled, were far from defeated. The breach in the Webway had demonstrated the vulnerability of even the Imperium's most secretive projects. The Chaos Gods and their servants took this as proof that even the most fortified defenses could be compromised with enough cunning and corruption. The war in the Webway became a rallying point for future demonic crusades, with sorcerers and cults across the galaxy seeking to replicate the catastrophic breach and unravel the Emperor's protections. In this way, the war had inadvertently emboldened the enemies of humanity, ensuring that the threat of chaos would never truly diminish. Within the Imperium itself, the war left lasting scars on its military and psychic orders. The Custodian Guard, once a force dedicated to direct service under the Emperor, was reshaped by the horrors they had endured within the Webway. Their already insurmountable standards of vigilance were heightened, and they adopted an even more somber and reclusive existence, focusing solely on the defense of the Golden Throne. Similarly, the Sisters of Silence, having played a critical role in holding back the Warp's influence, saw their ranks diminished, but their reputation elevated. They became synonymous with sacrifice and resilience, their presence serving as a grim reminder of the Webway's cost. The Adeptus Mechanicus, too, faced a reckoning. The technological marvels deployed during the war had been vital in securing the Nexus Gate, but many of their constructs and devices had been lost within the collapsing corridors. This fueled an obsessive drive among the tech priests to recover or recreate the lost knowledge of the Webway project. Some pursued this goal with reverence, seeing it as a way to honor the Emperor's vision, while others viewed it as an opportunity to ascend to greater heights of understanding, regardless of the dangers such experiments posed. Culturally, the war in the Webway became mythologized within the Imperium. Stories of valor, sacrifice, and divine intervention were passed down across generations, shaping how humanity perceived its role in the cosmos. The narrative of a cosmic struggle against overwhelming darkness became a cornerstone of Imperial propaganda, reinforcing the belief that survival demanded unwavering faith and obedience. Yet beneath these tales lay an unspoken truth, that humanity had come perilously close to oblivion, saved only by the Emperor's final act of defiance. Perhaps the most haunting consequence was the realization that the Webway itself, though partially stabilized, remained vulnerable. The labyrinthine corridors that had once promised a future free from the warp had become a sealed and forbidden realm, accessible only through the Golden Throne's fragile mechanisms. The Imperium's greatest technological achievement had become a prison of sorts, both for the Emperor and for the dreams of those who had fought to see humanity rise above its limitations. In the end, the war in the Webway reshaped not only the fate of Terra, but the very identity of the Imperium. The galaxy emerged from the conflict more divided and desperate than ever, and the scars of the war served as a reminder that even the boldest visions can be undone by the harsh realities of war. Though the immediate threat had passed, the legacy of the war endured, a reminder that the struggle against chaos was far from over, and that the price of survival would continue to rise with every passing age. One of the most captivating aspects of the war in the Webway is the scale and complexity of the conflict setting, a realm unlike any conventional battlefield in the galaxy. The Webway was a domain crafted by ancient hands, a labyrinth of shimmering corridors and vast chambers that defied the physical laws of the material universe. This intricate construct was neither fully real nor entirely immaterial. The Webway was a place where reality's fabric shifted unpredictably, bending light and time into illusions that could disorient even the most disciplined warriors. Battles here were fought not just with weapons, but with an understanding of how to navigate a space that obeyed no mortal geometry. The pathways of the Webway were more than transit routes. Some were living ecosystems of psychic resonance, while others were cold and featureless voids that absorbed sound and movement. There were conduits wide enough to hold entire fleets, as well as corridors so narrow they forced combatants to fight in claustrophobic melees. These unique environments introduced unprecedented challenges to the combatants. Strategies that worked in open warfare became useless when faced with labyrinthine mazes that shifted mid-battle or void-like expanses where sound and vision failed. This fluidity transformed even routine skirmishes into tests of wit and adaptation. Many Imperial forces became trapped in areas that appeared safe but twisted into inescapable loops or dead ends, leading to their slow demise without a single shot being fired. One widely debated element within the fan community is the nature of the Emperor's psychic constructs within the Webway. It is said that during the war, the Emperor manifested entire defensive barriers formed from his own psychic essence, walls of light and flame that held back entire hordes of demons. These barriers, however, were not mere shields. They were thought to contain echoes of past battles and visions of future conflicts. Soldiers who fought near these barriers often reported hearing whispers that warned them of imminent attacks or offered insights into weaknesses in the enemy's ranks. Whether these phenomena were intentional or an unanticipated side effect of the Emperor's psychic power remains a mystery. Another point of fascination is the role of the technology deployed by the Adeptus Mechanicus during the war. One of the most enigmatic devices rumored to have been used was known as the Etheric Stabilizer Array, an experimental mechanism designed to reinforce sections of the Webway by temporarily harmonizing its psychic structure with the physical plane. These arrays emitted waves of resonance intended to neutralize the destabilizing effects of warp energies. However, some accounts suggest that the technology was imperfect and may have inadvertently accelerated the degradation of certain pathways, contributing to the Webway's instability. This has led to ongoing debates among scholars and theorists within the lore community about whether the Mechanicus's interventions ultimately did more harm than good. The deployment of the Sisters of Silence also adds a unique dimension to the war. These Null Maidens were unlike any other force in the galaxy, their very presence capable of silencing psychic energies and rendering demons vulnerable. Yet the Webway's peculiar properties meant that their null auras interacted with the environment in unpredictable ways. In some instances, their presence caused entire sections of the Webway to become eerily calm and devoid of psychic interference, while in others, it seemed to create unstable voids where reality itself frayed. This inconsistency remains one of the most debated mysteries surrounding the sisters' involvement. Some claim that the Webway reacted to their null auras as a defense mechanism, while others argue that it was the immaterial realm's attempt to repel what it perceived as an unnatural disruption. Perhaps one of the most intriguing discussions centers on the Emperor's ultimate intentions for the Webway. Some interpretations suggest that the war itself exposed flaws in the Emperor's plan, flaws that even he could not foresee. If the Webway had been fully secured and integrated into the Imperium's infrastructure, humanity might have achieved an era of unparalleled dominance, free from the limitations and dangers of warp travel. However, the sheer scale of the challenges encountered during the war has led some to speculate that the Webway was never meant to be controlled in its entirety, that the Emperor's goal may have been more limited, intended to secure a small, stable portion rather than the entire network. This theory implies that the full scope of the Emperor's vision remains obscured, a subject of endless debate among scholars and enthusiasts alike. Additionally, the war in the Webway has given rise to speculation about other hidden factions that may have been drawn into the conflict. Whispers of mysterious constructs, ancient, self-sustaining defense systems left behind by the original builders of the Webway, have persisted throughout the community. These constructs, often described as mechanical guardians immune to both psychic influence and physical attack, are said to have intervened during the war, closing off entire segments of the Webway to prevent further incursion. Whether these guardians are myth or reality remains uncertain, but their potential existence adds another layer of intrigue to an already enigmatic theater of war. Finally, the psychological toll of the war remains a topic of fascination. The Webway was not only a physical battleground, but a psychic crucible where the mental resilience of every combatant was tested to its limit. Reports of hallucinations, time dilation, and spectral echoes of long-dead comrades were common among survivors. These phenomena have fueled theories that the Webway, as an extension of the Immaterium, reflected the fears and memories of those who entered it. Some suggest that these illusions were deliberate manipulations by the forces of chaos, while others believe that the Webway itself had become partially sentient, reacting to the emotional states of those who traversed its corridors. The war in the Webway remains one of the most complex and enigmatic conflicts in the galaxy's history. Its unique blend of ancient technology, psychic warfare, and cosmic stakes continues to capture the imagination of countless enthusiasts, inspiring speculation and debate about what truly transpired within its shadowed corridors. This ongoing fascination underscores the enduring mystery of the Webway, a place where reality itself becomes a canvas for both wonder and terror. The war in the Webway was defined not only by the grand strategy and catastrophic consequences, but by the extraordinary individuals who shaped its course. These figures, driven by purpose and burdened by impossible odds, became legends, both revered and feared. Their actions, virtues, and flaws remain etched into the annals of Imperial history and whispered about within the dark corridors of the Immaterium. Foremost among the defenders was the Emperor himself. His presence within the Webway was not merely symbolic. He was the linchpin holding the fragile domain together. Despite his immense power, the war revealed the heavy cost of his dual roles as a warlord and protector. The Emperor's brilliance as a strategist was unparalleled, his ability to foresee the cascading consequences of every decision making him a terrifying force against his foes. However, his greatest strength, his unmatched willpower, was also his greatest weakness. His relentless focus on sealing the Webway led him to disregard the physical toll the war took on his mortal form. Though he held the line, the cost of this singular commitment would eventually bind him to the Golden Throne, leaving the Imperium leaderless at its most vulnerable moment. Another figure whose influence reverberated through the war was Constantine Valdor, Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes. Valdor embodied loyalty and precision. As the Emperor's right hand, he was tasked not only with leading the elite guardians in battle, but also with ensuring the defense of the Emperor's physical form on Terra. Valdor's unbreakable sense of duty was both his strength and his burden. He was a master of combat and command, capable of directing vast defensive efforts while standing at the forefront of the bloodiest engagements. However, his rigid adherence to duty sometimes led to conflicts with those who believed in more flexible tactics. Valdor's unwavering dedication to his orders ensured that the custodians never faltered, but it also isolated him, reinforcing the perception that he was more of a guardian than a leader of men. The Sisters of Silence were led by Knight Commander Geneva Albrecht, an unyielding warrior whose null aura was said to dim even the brilliance of the Emperor's light. Albrecht's presence on the battlefield was a stark reminder of humanity's ability to defy the immaterial. Her mastery of close combat and leadership under chaotic conditions earned her the respect of allies and fear from foes. Yet, her strength lay not only in her martial prowess, but in her emotional resilience. Despite the isolation that came with her nature as a pariah, Albrecht inspired loyalty and admiration among her comrades. Her flaw, however, was her tendency to bear the weight of the war's losses as personal failures, which often led her to take on unnecessary risks to protect others. On the side of chaos, Magnus the Red was an undeniable force in the war in the Webway. His unmatched mastery of sorcery and deep understanding of the Immaterium made him a devastating adversary. Magnus wielded reality itself as a weapon, bending the laws of time and space to confound his enemies. Yet, for all his power, his actions were driven by a profound sense of betrayal and an obsessive need to prove his vision of the warp's potential. His genius was shadowed by hubris, and though his mastery over the Webway's shifting structure gave the forces of chaos their greatest victories, it also blinded him to the consequences of his decisions. His pride and desire for validation led him to underestimate the Emperor's resilience, ultimately contributing to the unraveling of his plans. Another terrifying presence was Kahar the Unbroken, a demon prince of Khorne who led the Berserker hosts into the heart of the conflict. Kahar was a living embodiment of rage and destruction, driven by an unquenchable thirst for bloodshed. His brutal strength and savage tactics shattered countless Imperial defenses, yet he was far more than a mindless force of carnage. Kahar possessed a cunning rarely associated with Khorne's champions, using feints and diversions to sow confusion and fear among his enemies before unleashing his full fury. His singular obsession with battle, however, made him predictable to those who could withstand his initial onslaught. When faced with unyielding defense rather than fear, Kahar often resorted to reckless charges, which could be exploited by those who maintained their composure. Tzeentch's forces were guided by the sorcerer Caron Val, a master manipulator and architect of illusions. Val's schemes within the Webway were subtle yet devastating. Whole battalions of defenders were led astray by false visions or trapped in psychic mazes from which there was no escape. Val's strength lay in his patience and his ability to anticipate and counter the plans of others. However, his reliance on subterfuge made him vulnerable when his manipulations were exposed. Unlike warriors who could rely on brute force when cornered, Val faltered when forced into direct confrontation, revealing the fragility behind his intricate web of deceit. Among the unsung heroes of the conflict was Adept Marastus of the Adeptus Mechanicus, whose genius in stabilizing collapsing sections of the Webway prevented countless disasters. Marastus was an eccentric but brilliant engineer who defied Mechanicus traditions by improvising and modifying sacred designs in the heat of battle. His adaptability and quick thinking made him indispensable, though his disregard for rigid doctrine often earned him suspicion from his peers. Despite his contributions, Marastus was plagued by visions of failure and doom, leading some to speculate that prolonged exposure to the Webway's distortions had begun to fray his mind. On both sides of the conflict, there were figures of great renown who shaped the war not merely with their strength, but with their decisions and convictions. The war was not just a clash of armies, but a test of wills, with every hero and villain driven by a unique purpose. The legacies of these individuals live on in the stories passed down through the ages, reminding the galaxy that it is often the actions of a few that determine the fate of many. The war in the Webway remains shrouded in mystery and speculation, with numerous unresolved questions fueling debates among scholars, historians, and fans alike. While the official records of the conflict provide some insight, many aspects of the war are subject to interpretation, half-truths, and outright conjecture. The strange nature of the Webway itself, combined with the secrecy of the Emperor's plans, has led to some of the most enduring and provocative theories in the lore of the Imperium. One of the most frequently discussed mysteries is the true extent of the Emperor's intentions for the Webway. Many believe that his primary goal was to create a secure means of interstellar travel, free from the dangers of the warp. However, some theorists argue that this was only a portion of his vision. There is speculation that the Emperor sought to create an entirely new type of empire within the Webway, a self-contained realm shielded from external threats, where humanity could flourish free from the interference of Xenos and the Immaterium. Others posit that the Webway project was meant to become a staging ground for a future campaign to seal or collapse parts of the warp entirely, cutting off the Chaos Gods from the material universe. The fragmented nature of the surviving records leaves these theories open to interpretation, with no definitive answers. Another source of intrigue revolves around the breach in the Webway. The initial catastrophic event that allowed the forces of chaos to pour in is officially attributed to a deliberate act of treachery. However, the identity of the betrayer and the precise mechanism of the breach remain unclear. Some accounts point to rogue agents corrupted by the whispers of the warp, while others suggest that the Webway itself may have played a role in its own collapse. The notion that the Webway, as a semi-sentient construct of immense psychic energy, could have reacted defensively to the Emperor's attempts to manipulate it raises unsettling questions. If the Webway resisted the Emperor's efforts, it could imply that even ancient constructs once thought to be lifeless retain some form of will or purpose. There is also significant speculation surrounding the Emperor's confrontation with Magnus during the war. While it is known that Magnus played a pivotal role in destabilizing the Webway, some scholars suggest that their encounter may have been more complex than a simple clash of wills. Certain interpretations propose that Magnus's presence was not entirely by choice, and that he may have been manipulated by forces beyond his understanding. Others argue that the Emperor and Magnus engaged in a deeper metaphysical battle within the Webway, with their psychic confrontation reshaping entire sections of the labyrinth. The truth of what transpired remains obscured by myth and allegory, with conflicting accounts painting vastly different pictures of the fateful encounter. The fate of the Imperial forces lost within the Webway is another enduring enigma. During the course of the war, numerous battalions and exploratory units vanished without a trace, cut off from communications and presumed destroyed. However, reports of spectral sightings and distant echoes within the sealed corridors of the Webway have led to the belief that some of these lost forces may still exist, trapped in isolated pockets where time and space have fractured. Some theorists suggest that these survivors may have formed isolated communities, adapting to their surreal environment over centuries. This theory, while speculative, raises troubling possibilities. If there are still remnants of humanity trapped within the Webway, they may have been subject to unimaginable horrors or worse, corruption by the warp. The existence of potential hidden defense systems within the Webway also sparks considerable debate. Some records speak of mechanical constructs or psychic guardians that appeared at key moments during the war, vanishing as quickly as they arrived. Descriptions of these entities vary, but they are often portrayed as being entirely neutral in allegiance, focused solely on sealing off compromised sections of the Webway, regardless of who occupied them. The origins of these constructs remain unknown, but their presence suggests that the Webway's creators may have left behind fail-safes to protect their creation from complete collapse. If these constructs exist, the question remains whether they could be reawakened or if they pose a future threat to anyone who attempts to reopen the sealed passages. Another significant question revolves around the Emperor's ultimate fate after the war. While it is widely accepted that the Emperor was mortally wounded and bound to the Golden Throne to sustain the seal on the Webway, some theories propose that a part of his consciousness may still linger within the labyrinth. This idea stems from reports of psychic phenomena experienced by those stationed near the Webway gate on Terra, visions of golden light, or the feeling of an unseen presence guiding their actions. While most dismiss these accounts as superstition or the after effects of prolonged exposure to the Immaterium's echoes, others view them as evidence that the Emperor's spirit remains partially active within the Webway, continuing his eternal vigil against the demonic hordes. Lastly, the nature of time within the Webway is a topic of endless fascination. The labyrinth's strange temporal distortions have led to speculation that the war may still be unfolding in some isolated sections, with soldiers fighting battles long forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. The Webway's corridors do not adhere to conventional timelines, and there are tales of explorers emerging after what felt like days, only to find that centuries had passed in the outside world. This raises the haunting possibility that some combatants, both Imperial and demonic, remain locked in an unending cycle of battle, oblivious to the passage of time beyond their narrow reality. These unresolved questions and speculative theories are a testament to the war's complexity and the lingering impact it has had on the Imperium. The mysteries of the Webway serve as a constant reminder that even the grandest visions can become lost within the shadows of the unknown, where the line between truth and myth is forever blurred. The war in the Webway left an indelible mark on the Imperium and the wider galaxy, with repercussions that continue to shape the course of history. The immediate aftermath was devastating, but the long-term effects of this conflict are even more profound. The partial stabilization of the Webway came at the cost of the Emperor's physical vitality, binding him to the Golden Throne and forever altering the power structure of the Imperium. This event marked the transition from a centralized, direct rule to an empire led by fragmented institutions often acting in their own interests. One of the most significant long-term consequences is the fragile state of the Webway itself. Despite the Emperor's sacrifice, the Webway remains sealed and unstable. While certain sections have been reinforced, large swaths remain too dangerous to access, riddled with warp-tainted rifts and latent anomalies. The question of whether the Imperium can ever attempt to restore or reclaim these regions remains unanswered. On the one hand, advancements in technology and psychic research may one day offer the means to repair the damage. On the other hand, any such effort would risk provoking a new incursion by the forces of chaos, potentially igniting another war even more catastrophic than the last. If the Webway were to be reopened, the stakes would be monumental. The Imperium's survival hinges on its ability to control stable routes across its vast expanse. A functional Webway would remove humanity's reliance on warp travel and the dangers of warp storms and demonic attacks. Such a development could unify the Imperium and give it a decisive advantage in future conflicts. However, the price of failure would be staggering. Another uncontrolled breach could potentially overwhelm Terra itself, leading to the annihilation of humanity's heartland. The fear of repeating past mistakes keeps many within the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Inquisition wary of tampering with what remains. The psychological impact of the war in the Webway also continues to reverberate through Imperial culture. The war became a symbol of both the Emperor's unmatched sacrifice and the ever-present threat posed by chaos. This dual legacy has fostered an unyielding sense of paranoia within the Imperium. Countless officials, generals, and inquisitors now operate under the assumption that such a catastrophic event could happen again at any time. This fear drives many decisions, from the expansion of fortress worlds to the suppression of research deemed too dangerous. While this vigilance has helped stave off further catastrophic breaches, it has also stifled innovation and created an atmosphere of distrust where progress is often viewed as heresy. There are also concerns regarding the integrity of the Golden Throne. The mechanisms that sustain the Emperor and maintain the Webway's partial seal are ancient and irreplaceable, and their degradation over millennia raises troubling questions. Should the throne ever fail, the seal could collapse entirely, releasing the horrors of the warp into the material realm. The looming threat of such an event has spurred efforts by the Adeptus Mechanicus to repair and reinforce the throne, but progress is slow and hindered by secrecy and conflicting agendas. This situation places the Imperium in a precarious position, as the survival of humanity could depend on a single point of failure. In the wider galaxy, the war in the Webway reshaped the geopolitical landscape. Many Xenos factions observed the conflict from a distance, recognizing the Imperium's vulnerability during this period of internal crisis. The Eldar, in particular, continue to harbor resentment over humanity's attempt to control a domain that was once their own. This simmering tension has led to more frequent skirmishes between Imperial forces and certain Eldar factions, who view humanity's ambitions as reckless and dangerous. Meanwhile, the forces of chaos were emboldened by their near success, viewing the war in the Webway as proof that even humanity's greatest defenses can be breached. The threat of another war in the Webway is not just a distant possibility. It is a looming shadow that hangs over the Imperium. While the Webway has been partially sealed, it remains a scarred and volatile realm where reality itself is fragile. The forces of chaos are patient and cunning, and their defeat within the Webway has only fueled their desire for vengeance. Cults dedicated to the Chaos Gods continue to seek ways to disrupt the Emperor's protections, while rogue psychers and heretical factions experiment with forbidden sorceries in the hopes of uncovering a weakness. On the other hand, there is a faint but persistent belief that the Webway, if ever fully reclaimed, could usher in a new golden age for humanity. Some within the Imperium hold out hope that the Emperor's ultimate vision can still be realized, that one day the Webway can be stabilized and opened as a sanctuary from the warp. These idealists, though few in number, continue to research ways to contain and neutralize the influence of the Immaterium, believing that technological and psychic advancements could hold the key to humanity's future. Yet they remain in constant conflict with more conservative factions who see any tampering with the Webway as an invitation to disaster. Ultimately, the war in the Webway serves as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of humanity's resilience. It illustrates the dangers of ambition when it collides with forces beyond comprehension, but also stands as a testament to the Emperor's unmatched will and the sacrifices made by countless defenders. Whether humanity will ever again dare to expand into the Webway, or if it will remain a sealed tomb for eternity, is unknown. What is certain is that the memory of the war endures, shaping the decisions and fears of generations to come. The galaxy remains a volatile and unpredictable place where hope and despair are in constant flux. The Webway, scarred but not destroyed, represents the fine line between salvation and annihilation. Whether humanity's future will be brighter or darker, because of it depends not only on technology and faith, but on the lessons learned or ignored from that harrowing conflict.